few weeks ago, I shared a video giving my 5 reasons why I decided to build my own editing PC, and I've been using that now for a couple of weeks, and it's time to check in and see if it was worth it. If you want to see that video on the 5 reasons I decided to do this, I'll link it above just here. But for now, we're going to look into the performance of that PC and see if I really got value for money out of my own build. Previously, I had been using a Dell Alienware M15, which was now quite old. It used an 8th generation Intel CPU, which is like many generations out of date, considering Intel are now on their 15th generation, and also an M1 MacBook Pro. And that also is quite out of date given that Apple are now on their M4 series. In this video, I'm going to compare the performance of the new PC that I built with those older laptops and see just how much of a difference the new build makes. In my business, I do both photography and video, and primarily that is focused around events. So I do event photography and I make event videos. I've decided to make 4 benchmarks, real world benchmarks that are based on the work that I actually do on a day-to-day basis to see whether this PC really makes a difference. So I'm not using synthetic benchmarks, I'm using the kind of work that I actually do in practice, and maybe it's similar to the kind of work that you do in practice, and then the benchmarks may be useful information for you also. Firstly, the PC that I built cost just over £1,500 in the UK and probably about $1,500 in the US. I chose the parts very carefully, and I'm going to do another video on why I chose the specific parts that I did, and there's also some information on that in the last video about the reasons why I decided to do it. But roughly, it's based on an Asus Z890 motherboard, which is fairly future-proof, having Thunderbolt 5, USB 4, Wi-Fi 7, and some fairly good specs around the interfaces for all the various components that you might add, like PCIe version 5 and so on. I added to that motherboard an Intel 15th generation i7-265 processor. I didn't feel that it was worth going up to the i9. As I say, I'll explain my reasons for that in a future video, and I added an RTX 5070 GPU to that. Again, I could have gone for the 5090, but that would have been more than twice the price. The reason I went for a 50 series rather than a 40 series RTX, which might have been a little bit cheaper, is that the 50 series now has onboard support for H.264, H.265, encoding and decoding, so that offers a real performance improvement and offloads the CPU quite a bit when you're running it. So that's the basic build. I have a couple of fast NVMe SSDs built into it, and so the performance overall is expected to be fairly good. You could build better, but you'd have to pay a lot more for it. So let's just see how that compares with the 2 laptops that I had previously been using, the Dell M15 and the M1 MacBook Pro. So let's just look at the benchmarks that I made that reflect my real world actual work. And they're all based on Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Premiere Pro. I doubt if they're very different to any other editors that you may choose to use. So if you use DaVinci Resolve or whatever, it's likely, I think, to produce similar results. So the first benchmark that I decided to test these systems on was dropping the Warp Stabiliser effect onto a 4K 10-bit 422 clip and see how long that takes. So that's typically something that I do on a regular basis. I have to stabilize clips, and sometimes it's a little bit frustrating as to how long it used to take for Warp Stabiliser to do its work and let me get back to normal editing again. The second benchmark was adding Morph Cut to 2 adjacent clips. Morph Cut is a non-GPU accelerated effect, and I wanted to see how long that was going to take, because again, I occasionally use that to join together clips seamlessly, and I was always frustrated at how long it takes to process that Morph Cut. It seemed to take an inordinate amount of time on the Dell laptop and on the M1 MacBook Pro. So let's see how it works out on the new build. The third benchmark that I decided to create is perhaps the most relevant of all, and that is how long it takes to export a 7-minute, it could be any length, but I chose 7 minutes just to make it manageable, to export a 7-minute video that has a mix of different codecs in it. So I've got 4K 10-bit 422, I've got 4K 8-bit content, I have got DJI content, I've got pictures. It's all color graded, so that should add a degree of complexity to it. There are still images in it, there are special effects in it, there are Mogart graphics in it as well. There's a whole mix of things, and it represents the kind of video that I'm ultimately producing. So how long will it take Adobe Media Encoder to export that video? And we'll cover that for the 3 systems. And then finally, the last one reverts to photography. I use a Sony A1 for my event photography mostly, and that creates 50 megapixel images. And so the test that I've developed is to export 50 of those 50 megapixel images to full resolution JPEGs. Now they all have edits built into them, a variety of effects added to them, some AI generated selections, and exporting those is one of the things that obviously I want to do fairly quickly. Sometimes when I'm doing event photography, we might be talking about 200 or 300 images, and so therefore 50 is a representative sample that is not unrealistic of an export that I might want to do. So let's get into that and have a look at the results fairly quickly, look at some graphs and see how the relative performance of the 2 laptops compares to the new editing PC build. Having a look then at the first benchmark, you can see here the graph shows in seconds how long it took for Premiere Pro to analyze and implement the Warp Stabiliser effect on that clip, and you can see that the new desktop build was about 200 seconds to do this, whereas the Dell M15 took over 1,000 seconds. So the new build was over 5 times faster than the Dell M15 and almost twice as fast as the MacBook. The MacBook did very much better than the Dell in this case, and that's because the Apple processors are really good at single core performance. There's less of a difference between Mac and PC when it comes to multi-core performance, but in single core performance the Apple chips are fairly unmatched. So in this case the desktop was twice as fast or almost twice as fast as the MacBook, and that's a good improvement. I'm sure if I measured it against an M4 MacBook, the MacBook may well win in that case. And so for single core performance of this kind of activity, then the desktop is pretty good. Possibly not world-beating, but a vast improvement on what I had been previously using. Moving on then to the second benchmark, which is adding the Morph Cut effect to a sequence in Premiere Pro. And here the desktop was significantly outperforming both the MacBook and the Dell M15. And this is not really relevant to the GPU performance. It's purely CPU for this non-accelerated effect. It doesn't offer as big an improvement, but still we're talking about something that is twice as fast as what I was previously used to with the 2 laptops. So that again is a good improvement for me. Then the third one is my most important benchmark here, and that is the export of the mixed codec 4K sequence from Premiere Pro. And in this case the new desktop was between 3 and 4, almost 4 times faster than the MacBook M1, and it was at least 2.5 times faster than the Dell M15. So that to me is a massive improvement and will really help my work, because sometimes I'm exporting videos that might be an hour long potentially. If it's a recording of an event that needs to be covered in full, the various videos that are produced could be quite a bit longer than this 7-minute video that we've tested this on. So that's a huge improvement in Premiere Pro export times between the new build and the previous laptops that I was using. And then the final benchmark is exporting 50 images from my Sony A1 to full res JPEG, and there's an immense improvement in the new desktop over the Dell and the MacBook, and in this case we're talking about between 5 and 6 times faster, and that makes a huge difference in day-to-day work when we're talking about photography. A couple of other things I want to say about benchmarking just before moving on, and the first is that I used the beta version of Premiere Pro, and the reason behind that is that it's only currently in the beta version that there is support for the RTX 50 series in doing 264 and 265 encoding and decoding, and this is June 2025. Soon, I guess, the version 25 of Premiere Pro will move out from beta to full release, and then there will be full support for the 50 series in the standard versions of that. And the second thing is that although these benchmarks represent work that I actually do, they don't really reveal the full story, because the biggest difference is felt in the fluidity, responsiveness, and the ability to make use of the new performance that the PC provides. For example, I don't need to make proxies anymore. I can scrub through the video without dropping any frames. I can run the video and check the quality at full resolution without dropping any frames whatsoever. So previously I had to use proxies in order to get that editing usability out of it, and now I don't need to make proxies at all. So that's another benefit time-wise. I don't need to worry about doing that. One more thing that I would like to say as regards benchmarking and the feel of this PC, and that is that in particular the GPU, the RTX 5070, is an overclocked version. I could overclock this and get additional performance out of it, and the same with the PC. I could overclock it a bit more. There is some further tuning that I could do on the motherboard in order to improve the speeds of various components here. I haven't done any of that. It's as the products come straight out of the box. The only thing I've tuned are the fans in the PC in order to make sure that there's no overheating and that there's no excess noise. So apart from tuning the fans, I really haven't made any significant adjustments, but I'm sure I'll get into that in the future and see if that increases the performance of this build even further at no extra cost. So overall, with the results of these benchmarks and the feel of the new PC in operation, to me, it's made a vast improvement. So would I recommend that people build their own PC? Well, yes, under certain circumstances. If you do a lot of work from your own desk and you have a reasonably heavy load of processing, either for photography or for video, then building your own PC is a cost-effective way of getting a performance PC at the right price. Not only that, but it is much more future-proof in that you can change any of the components as you need to in the future. You know how it was built. You know how you're going to be able to upgrade it in the future and maintain it. If something goes wrong, you're easily going to be able to fix it. So it's a much more reliable and future-proof solution. So I would really recommend it. But in the situation where you do a lot of editing on site or in a coffee shop or somewhere away from your desk, then laptops are undoubtedly the better solution for this. You end up with something that is not as upgradable and perhaps doesn't have the same performance for the money, but you do have portability and the ability to take it with you and edit wherever you need to actually do that. Of course, there's a hybrid way of working where you can use both a desktop and a laptop and maybe share your media on a high-speed SSD drive, and you can work from wherever you need to. So that's a potential solution. I'd really love to know what you think about this. Would you consider building your own PC? If you have built your own PC, what has your experience of that been? What do you think about the relationship between editing PCs and laptops? Give me your thoughts in the comments below, and anything else you'd like to know about that, just let me know and I'll cover that in an upcoming video. I'm going to do one on the logic behind each component that I put into this PC and why I chose them in particular and how they give me value for money. So if you'd like to see that, please subscribe. And if you got any value out of this video, then please give it a like. It really would help my channel. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.